Hello. I would like to make a small presentation of the story The Telltale Heart, and it is a short story written by the famous American author Edgar Allan Poe, and he was the pioneer of the modern horror story. It was first published in 1843, where Romanticism was the popular genre of literature. And to cut a long story short, Romanticism was the evil twin to the Romantic movement in the history of literature. And this short story of Poe is also a great example of the Gothic genre the author became famous for. Before we start my analysis, I would like to make a small presentation of my disposition. First, I would like to talk about the setting in order to gain an insight into the environment in the story. After that, I would like to make a characterization of the narrator, which also is the main character in this story. At the end of my analysis, I would like to talk about some of the hidden symbols in the story. To sum it all up, I would like to share my interpretation of the story, such as what's the main theme and what would Edgar Allan Poe like to teach us with this story. In class, we have worked with the theme serial killers, so the last thing I will do about in this video is to talk about the question, what does this short story have to do with the theme serial killers? Let's get started. The first thing I like to talk about is the setting. First of all, Edgar Allan Poe uses two different types in this short story, even though the story actually are meant to be in past tense. And I have chosen a quotation, which is, "I felt that I must scream." Here we have two verbs. The first felt is past tense and the second must is present. And maybe Edgar Allan Poe chooses to mix up two different times to make the narrator reliving this incident while we are reading it as a reader. And maybe this tells us something about his state of mind. Maybe the narrator have lost his control while he wants to explain what happened. Yeah. And the next point is where the story takes place, and it only takes place in the old man's house. And we hear something about the description of the house. It's very dark in there, and I have the quotation, "The room was black as a pitch with a thick darkness." The room is it's very, very dark in there, and maybe it's a symbolism of his state of mind, that he's not capable of seeing himself while he kills the old man. And actually the whole story takes place in darkness, which I think it's a very important detail since the story is so dramatic. The last thing I want to talk about in the setting is actually the symbol of the whole plot. You can compare the plot in the house to Freud's psychoanalysis. Like the house was some kind of his state of mind, and I have drawn an illustration that shows that, and that is actually what I'm going to talk about in the characterization of the main character. And the interesting thing about Edgar Allan Poe's writing is his ability to use sentence structure as an indicator as to which part of his man's character, which is Ed, superego, and ego, is currently driving the actions in the story. And the first one I'd like to talk about is the superego, which is a part of a person's mind that acts as a, self-critical conscience, reflecting social standards, and it's mainly learned from parents and teachers. And this superego can be seen especially in the title, which says The Telltale Heart, and it could also be interpreted as the heart tells the story, which he actually did at the end of this short story. The main character decides to tell the truth to the two police officers, and the main character is disturbed by a heartbeat that he believes belonged to the old man. But actually, if you think about it, maybe the heartbeat belongs to himself. The next one I like to talk about is the id, which is the deepest part of the unconscious mind that represent the most basic natural human needs and emotions such as hunger or anger or the wish for pleasure as we see in this story. And I don't have a quotation for this one, but we hear about the main character that buries the old man's body in the basement like he's trying to bury the guilt inside of him. So yeah, that's his need for killing this man. The last stage in Freud's psychoanalysis is the ego, which in the illustration is supposed to be the ground floor. The ego is the balance between the two other stages. In my interpretation, the ego is seen where he tries to explain the readers that he is a sane person. I have found two different quotations to this one. The first one is an example of him trying to get rid of the evil thoughts inside of him, like a reference to the superego as well. And it is. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. So in this quotation, it seems like the narrator tries to connect with his superego. He tells us that he loves the man and he don't like the idea of killing him. But it also seems like this superego is weak and he can't connect with him because it ends up with it killing the old man. In the next quotation, we see a more manipulative side of him when he lets his inner lust control his mind. It is. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise at this? In this one, the narrator tries to explain that he is a sane person as he feels sympathy for the old man and says, would a madman have been so wise at this? But on the other hand, it is a crazy act to spend an hour placing a head in an opening. So he can't really say that he's a sane person because it's a crazy act that he has been doing. So to sum it all up, maybe he's trying to hide his insanity in this one. My last point in the analysis is symbolism. Edgar Allan Poe tries to explain how psychopaths are thinking before they decide to kill a person. In this case, the main character is focusing on the old man's eye. And then I have the following quotation. This I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And this quotation shows that the main character did not want to kill the innocent man in his sleep, when his eyes were closed. He only wants to kill them when his evil eye is open. And why so? Maybe the eye is the mirror of the soul, and only by looking to the man's evil eye, he is able to commit the crime that he deeply wants to. And I know from Edgar Allan Poe's poetry and written that he believes that a man knows what's right and wrong, but has a deep desire to do what's wrong, and he can only make the wrong choice when the man's eye is open. But why is the old man only called the old man? We don't hear about their relationship or how they two people are connected. And maybe the eye could be has a simple meaning of the father's view of the narrator. And maybe he's trying to make a simple distance between the father-son relationship. The eye makes him scared and vulnerable. And maybe it's easier to kill the father than disappoint him. And the last point I have about the symbolism is the death. Simply the death. In the text we get a lot of clues about how maybe the narrator fears to die himself. We hear about the clock that's ticking, like the time is running out, the darkness in the house that I talked about earlier, and the fact that he buries a man like he's scared of end up in the cemetery himself. or the house is a cemetery. And then the last point, the heartbeat, that is disturbing him completely, and he thinks that the old man isn't dead yet. The next thing I want to talk about is my interpretation about the story. And I think the moral of the Telltale Heart is that we should not commit crimes because, in the end, our own sense of guilt will expose us. And why I think of this is that the narrator actually decides to tell the truth, even though that he first seems confident with his actions. And then I have this quotation: I smiled for what I had to fear. I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. In that quotation, it sounds like the narrator has a lot of confidence and he's not scared of the police officers at all. But, however, because of his guilt, the narrator imagines his heart, he hears his heart and his dead victim beating louder and louder. And he thinks the police officer hears the beating heart too. So the story ends up with him telling the truth. His guilty conscience has gotten the better of him. And I believe this is a moral because he decides to tell the truth. If this was a psychopath, the person would have stayed calm in this situation. And that is why I want to talk about the last point of my analysis, and that is the reference to the theme. Because even though that the narrator decides to tell the truth, he has a lot of the typical characteristic of a psychopath that we learn from class. It's a male. He is probably in the age between 25 and 35. He has a high intelligence. The narrator uses formal language and is capable to describe exactly how he felt in the situation. But the narrator also tries to come up with an argument that shows he's the same person. For an example, that he's able to feel sympathy for the old man and he understands that the victim is afraid, which is seen on page 3 in the document that we have got, but don't have tried to read the whole section up. And if we compare this story to one of the things we have worked in class, we have seen an interview with Ted Bundy, and he also tries to come up with argument of why he is a normal person, as the narrator is trying to do in this story. But to sum it all up, I think that Edgar Allan Poe tries to make a normal person feel sympathy for the serial killer, as he's trying to make him seem like a sane person, and he actually tells the truth at the end. So I think he's trying to describe what is going on inside the mind of a killer, but he also wants us to think of the consequences if you follow your bad instincts.